This visual represents an impossible collision. On one side, we have classical theology's definition of God, pure actuality, existing in an uncreated, completely formless state. On the other side, we have our created universe, a spatio-temporal order, strictly defined by limits, boundaries, and rigid geometric shapes. When pure formlessness attempts to interact directly with a system built entirely on form, they are repelled immediately. The physics are completely incompatible. Christian tradition frequently uses a specific shorthand to bridge this gap, stating simply that the divine assumes human form in the Incarnation. While accurate, this phrasing bypasses a structural gap. We have to ask a severe metaphysical question. How can an entity completely devoid of morph, lacking any shape, boundary, or capacity for change, even enter a realm where possessing form is the strict, uncompromising prerequisite for existence? The Incarnation functions as the final movement in a sequential double metamorphosis. Bridging the infinite and the finite requires an intermediary ontological mechanism. The uncreated divine must undergo an internal transition before a human physical shape can ever enter the equation. The initial state of the uncreated is absolute transcendence. It exists entirely outside of space and time, possessing zero physical boundaries. It cannot be measured, contained, or localized. For an entity in this state to engage with a bounded universe, it must execute the first step in the sequence. Before the divine can take a specific human form, it must first consent to the very category of form. It must agree to the parameters of shape. The Gospel of John states, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." This eternal Word is not a physical shape or a spoken sound. It is the primordial capacity for form itself. It is the underlying pattern of all being, generated within the uncreated God. This inward fold represents an active, profound act of self-limitation, preserving God's eternal essence while establishing a new mode of presence. By generating this eternal word boundary, the uncreated renders itself capable of being apprehended. This newly generated boundary functions as the absolute prerequisite for human perception. Watch what happens when we introduce an observer bound by physical laws. A line of connection can now link the human observer to the boundary of the eternal word, demonstrating successful data compatibility. The formless has given itself a perimeter we can actually detect. This initial consent establishes the structural basis for all human interaction with the divine. Every historical act of revelation, a voice echoing from the sky, a burning bush in the desert, relies entirely on this exact capacity to enter the sphere of temporality. Without this primordial condescension, any engagement between an infinite God and a universe governed by geometry and time remains physically impossible. To understand exactly how this self-limitation operates without diminishing God's infinite nature, we look to the framework of philosopher Jean-Luc Marion. Marion operates on a central axiom regarding perception: what shows itself first gives itself. Before anything can be perceived, it must actively volunteer to be perceived. This schematic visualizes Marion's concept applied to the uncreated. God acts as the ultimate given. The boundless light source deliberately funnels itself through a microscopic prism, actively volunteering to enter the highly restricted realm of human perception. This act of givenness is a deliberate act of infinite generosity, a choice to be received that leaves the actual power of the source untouched. This vast, sweeping act of giving precedes any specific physical shape a human could eventually touch or apprehend. The choice to be visible comes before the visible form itself. Givenness operates as the exact ontological bridge required. It guarantees the created universe is structurally capable of receiving its creator long before a physical body is ever formed. Because the first morph successfully established structural compatibility, the second stage of the sequence can occur. This is the incarnation itself. The text points out a crucial detail about the specific form taken. Christ assumes the anthromorph, which translates to universal human nature. Returning to our original model, we can map this final step. Inside the boundary field of the eternal word, the universal anthromorph is actualized into a highly specific, complex topological node network. This localized physical existence is Jesus of Nazareth. Notice the strict dependency sequence here. The inner node, the second morph, is nested completely within the outer boundary field, the first morph. The physical human body cannot exist as a divine vessel without that outer boundary acting as an interface. This visualizes the failure of standard theological shortcuts. Skipping directly from the infinite uncreated space to the localized human node results in an immediate error state. It's an ontological category error that breaks the logic of both. The Incarnation is the final stage of the divine's prior concession to form. It relies entirely on the precise sequential logic we've mapped out. Mapping this sequence immediately creates intellectual friction. We now have a paradox where a highly finite human form is attempting to contain infinite divine givenness without physically collapsing under the pressure or reducing God down to a mere idol. Jean-Luc Marion provides the specific mechanical solution to this problem through his concept of the saturated phenomenon. A saturated phenomenon is an event so rich in intuition and pure givenness that it actively overwhelms the finite concepts we use to measure reality. It gives more data than the receiver is built to process. Jesus of Nazareth operates as the definitive instance of a saturated phenomenon. Look at the complex human node. As infinite energy pours in from the uncreated source, it pushes against the internal boundaries, completely maxing out capacity. But crucially, it doesn't break the container. Colossians 1:15 calls Christ the image of the invisible God, outlining the exact difference between an idol and an icon. An idol is crafted down to human measure. It absorbs and traps energy. The icon allows infinite energy to pass entirely through, radiating in superabundance. A system outputting this much infinite data cannot be logically mapped by a human mind in real time. It demands profound, open reception rather than strict intellectual comprehension. The existence of the saturated anthromorph proves the mathematical and theological possibility that God can fully inhabit physical space while perfectly maintaining his infinite nature. When we pull back from the specific mechanics of Christ's physical body, this framework forces a total reevaluation of basic principles defining how the Creator interacts with humanity. Transcendence no longer functions as static, aloof distance. It operates as a dynamic, active willingness to self-limit. It requires an extreme act of humility before any creation can even occur. Immanence means God has morphed into the possibility of existing within creation. The infinite actively permeates the finite. This applies to our creation in the Imago Dei. Notice these specific nodes illuminating with the exact geometric signature and energy pattern as the saturated anthromorph. This visual link is more than a similarity. It's a shared structural blueprint. Our human essence is defined by our capacity to perceive and take on various forms. This flexibility is a direct reflection of the divine's foundational consent to morph. God is dynamically engaged with the very fabric of existence. The Creator did not simply observe a universe of forms from a distance. The divine potter took on the very clay of his making, entering the logic of shape and time to draw humanity into a direct communion between Creator and clay.